So let's go to the iPad, okay? So the most thumbs up, the most upvoted question, I'll read it out here. It says, what guidance would CGN give regarding the nature and the role of women in leadership in our churches, or for churches that are looking to affiliate with CGN? So great question, and then there's a variety of ones that kind of ask more nuanced versions of that. And so before going to the panel, I think the question is, what guidance would CGN give? And it's actually kind of hard for even any one person on a panel to answer on behalf of a network or a movement. But you know what? We actually wrote a document about it back in 2019. So there might be a link that shows up on the screen if anyone wants to look it up later on. But I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's like a 3-page document. But what this document is actually really expanding upon like one paragraph from a much earlier just statement of faith. And one of the earlier affirmations that CGN put in our theological affirmations is this. We believe that God created human beings, male and female, in his own image. He created them sinless, equal in value, dignity, and worth. According to his purpose and design, God created them to fulfill distinct but complementary roles in the context of marriage and family and the local church. And then this document over the 3 or 4 pages, it kind of unpacks that a little bit and then speaks about how, yes, we are a complementarian network and family of churches. But then it acknowledges that within the complementarian framework, there is like a spectrum of application of agreeing upon this statement. How does it work out in churches? So there's various ways in which this theology is applied. And then it talks about what some people call soft complementarianism and what some people call hard complementarianism. These are terms that maybe were useful in 2019, but maybe are kind of even less useful now. That's another rant or topic. But the way that this works out in different churches can and does vary. But what this paper really lays out is that the highest office in the local church, whether we call it elders, pastor, senior pastor, that is something that's reserved for qualified male leaders. It's not that it's open for any or every male, but it's open for qualified males who fulfill those requirements and character traits listed out in 1 Timothy and also in Titus. And so that's there in that document from 2019, which is referencing the earlier thing. So I want to answer that question, not with our hot takes or first impressions, but through this carefully phrased and worded document. So how does that work out in your churches? Or how does this, the actual question is, how does this work out with the idea of women in leadership in our churches? How has that worked out in your various congregations over the years?
It's worked out very well.
Great.
What's interesting about this topic is that every pastor that you ask the details of how it works out, they'll all have a completely different way it works out. Pastor Chuck, I've heard him say it. I'm the senior pastor of the church. Women can do anything here. And he had a woman, and some people don't want to hear this, but he had a lady year after year teaching theology in their school of ministry. There's people that don't want to hear that, just like we don't want to hear that Lonnie Frisbee was used by God, a guy that later on it came out he struggled with sexual sin. But it's the reality. Chuck was more liberal on this issue than Brian Broderson. Brian's getting hammered on this issue. Kay Smith was the most conservative person ever, and she was married to Chuck, and they got along. Chuck's saying women can do anything because he wasn't insecure in his masculinity or in his role as the pastor, and so women had this incredible freedom. I don't think I'm as liberal as Chuck, but Chuck he had women speaking in the pulpit, Elizabeth Elliot and Mama Wong from China.
Yeah.
And I like living in reality and telling the truth. This is the truth of our history. And yet Chuck's married to a woman that if a man walked into the room, she would stop talking. She had this deep conviction that she's not to teach men. And I just thought that was so interesting that Pastor Chuck had maybe the most liberal of all the people in Calvary, and he's married to a woman who's the most conservative. But it didn't affect their marriage. It didn't affect anything, you know. I never even think about it until someone brings it up. You know, we started 25 churches in Hungary. They're all men that are the senior pastors. I saw my role as a pastor. My role as a pastor is to make sure everybody in the church is thriving in their call and their ministry. My role is not even about me. You know, I'm not building my ministry. It's not about me. I've been given, you know, this call of God, this charge of God to make sure every person in the church is thriving. Girls and boys are thriving in what God called them to do. It's the same way I see myself as a husband and as a dad. My role is not to control my kids and my wife and tell her what to do. My role is to get her all the supplies and encouragement to do everything she's supposed to do. And my wife is a rock star. My wife is smarter than me, unbelievably gifted, and doing some unbelievable stuff in the secular world, in her impact for Christ. My kids are thriving. But I think when it's a topic that there's some type of power struggle, you know, that our culture is in this, everybody's in a power struggle against everybody. And I'm like, I don't want to go there, you know.
I'll jump in.
But it's worked very well. If you take your role as a pastor to make sure everybody's thriving, you take your role as a husband and a dad to make sure they're thriving, people will love following your leadership. But I'm not going to tell you where I stand on between Chuck and Kay. I'm going to keep you guessing.
Yeah, so for us, in that spectrum, as Mike is talking about in regard to soft or hard complementarian, those labels might be confusing. So in practice, for us, we believe that women can hold every office of leadership in the church with the exception of elder and pastor. So we have women who are deaconesses in our church. I believe in the church where I serve, the leadership team of elders and deacons is approximately 28 to 30, and about 12 to 14 of those leaders are women. We believe that women can oversee ministries in the church. We have 82 small groups in our church, and many of them are led by women. And in our context, I would not have an objection to men being in a small group learning from women. We host the community Bible study in our sanctuary, and it's taught by a woman, a CBS, and there are men that attend that, and I don't have an objection to that. I don't believe, my understanding of 1 Timothy 2, that a woman is to be the ultimate arbiter of theology or doctrine in the local church, but I believe that women in a biblical mandate can hold leadership offices. And my observation is that there are incredible leaders among women in our churches, and they should be empowered and they should be equipped. And Brenda, you're doing a fantastic job of that with When She Leads resource. And they should receive intentional discipleship to grow as leaders, and in our context, we make that available for them. But those are the limitations that we see. So real quickly, you know, as complementarian, we're taking as a primary verse 1 Timothy chapter 2 for that viewpoint and trying to figure out on that spectrum. And as Greg said, Pastor Chuck, many times in many seasons, was just very carte blanche, that women could have all roles. And his views changed back and forth in different seasons over a long arc of ministry. The egalitarian view primarily comes from Galatians 3:28, that there's no difference between male or female, Jew or Gentile, or slave or free. And so therefore men and women can hold all roles in the church. And so our family of churches has been more of the complementarian, and we're trying to figure out each of us in that reign.
Yeah, Greg said that he doesn't think about this issue unless someone else brings it up. Brenda, is that true for you? Do you not think about this issue unless it gets brought up?
Predominantly, because here's been my experience. It doesn't matter how many pastors you have in the room. There are going to be nuances in this conversation, and I think that God holds that pastor responsible for his own congregation. And I think right when you form an opinion, God might come along and just blow you out of the water. We've had that. My husband walked into the sanctuary one Sunday and saw a bunch of transmitters, and he said, "What is this for?" And they said, "Oh, this is for our Chinese ministry." And he said, "We have a Chinese ministry?" Well, we had a lady in the church that was an evangelist, and she would go out, and she's brought hundreds of Chinese people into this room, getting saved, getting baptized. Who's going to stop her? Not us and not God. So I think that we do have to be careful with this conversation, and I think each pastor has an obligation to sit with it. And you might judge somebody else and then sit down and have coffee with them and talk about the nuances and why they did that and go, "Oh, I would have done that exact same thing," knowing that. But you had some great stuff back there you were talking about.
Yeah, I think for a pastor, this is a stewardship issue. So at Calvary Fort Lauderdale, 60% of our congregants are women. So, and if Romans 12 is true, and 1 Corinthians 12 is true, and Joel 2 is true, that God pours out his gifts, not in a discriminatory way, male, female, young, old, right? Then if we're only stewarding 40% of the gifts of our church, we're not being good stewards. And so God holds me accountable to steward my entire church. So like one example we thought through was we had this great training program for next-gen leaders and pastoral development. And about 10 years in, we're like, we don't do the same thing for women. Single women, women that have gifted to be evangelists, to teach, and to do all these things. And so we had to make a change to go, we have to develop our female leaders in the same way that we develop our male leaders. And that's created a culture of empowering our female leaders to do what God's called them to do.
Amen.
And on that note, we were talking backstage about, we don't, in female circles, we don't have this conversation as much because we're not so concerned with can we get at the pulpit or not. We are much more concerned with how are our pastors and elders going to develop us for ministry. We want to be developed. And so my encouragement to pastors and elders in this room is find female leaders who can develop others within your church, develop women to do the work of the ministry. And one way that we are doing that here at Reliance is, I'm the pastor's wife. I could do all of the teaching if I want, and I've seen it a lot of times, or I can develop a team and raise up teachers, and I could teach young women how to teach. And then a few years back, God said, well, why aren't you doing that with writing? Our women's ministry team, we just finished the last of the epistles. We have written and taught 21 epistles in the last 5 years. And we've developed a writing team that goes along with that. We've developed an editing team. And I want to teach my leaders not only to be leaders, but to be leaders who then develop other leaders. And so we take very seriously and intentionally leadership development, and we do that day in and day out. There's not a meeting that they have that they don't do at least 5 or 10 minutes of leadership training, because we want to train up people. If you don't train, if you don't develop, they will leave, because we want to use our giftings. The Lord's gifted us in our department head structure that we have here, and that started way back when we had our first few female leaders. We sit down with our pastors, and we do have a seat at the table. We're not elders, we're not pastors, but we are very well, they respect us, we respect them, we trust their leadership, we trust their guidance, we trust their vision, and they're developing us to be leaders that can be effective in our local churches, out in our homes, and in our communities with our neighbors. And our women are thriving, and they're gifted. and they're courageous and they're championed to take risks for the gospel.
Amen. Yeah, I wanted to just add, we have a teacher training class at our church, and about 25% of the people in that teacher training class are women, and they're great teachers and fantastic, and they don't have an opportunity to teach Sunday mornings in our context. That is reserved for male leadership in our context, but there's some great teachers. I was being cheeky. I told Mike that he asked Brenda what she thinks of male roles of ministry should be, but that was just me being cheeky.
And just a quick, a really great picture of how this complementarian relationship works is to look at the life of Aquila and Priscilla in the New Testament, because you'll see, like, in certain moments, Aquila's name is listed first as the provider, as the tent maker, as the one who moved the family. But in certain conversations, specifically with the conversation with Apollos, Priscilla's leading the conversation. And so there's this back and forth that you can see. It's a beautiful nuance in the New Testament, much like Barnabas and Saul, then Paul and Barnabas. So pay attention to that, because that shows complementary relationship in a marriage and in ministry context.
Think about the first people the first human beings that Jesus commanded to go preach the gospel. Mm-hmm. They were the Marys at the tomb. Jesus told them, go and tell, go preach it, go tell the male knuckleheads that are hiding that didn't get it, is that in the Bible or not? You know what I'm saying? So the whole conversation's like, it's a little bit frustrating to me.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, I don't think that means what you think it means, though. I hear that verse a lot of times, or that reference, and the idea, and you're not doing that, but I hear people say the apostle to the apostles, the first preachers were females. And then there seems to be then like this thread that therefore there should be like female preachers and apostles today. And that's not what you're saying.
I didn't say any of that.
Yeah. Sorry, my trigger is like sensitive right now.
And that's what's frustrating about the whole topic, is that you can read the Bible and Jesus clearly told the girls to go tell. But today people are actually asking a question. Would Jesus tell a girl to go tell men anything? When he just did.
Right.
And then the whole thing comes in of all these big words of apostle and pastor and blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, the women are supposed to just sit there and do nothing and say nothing. It's like, what's going on? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's whole matrices and layers of like discourse surrounding a very simple verse and a very simple story.
Yeah, we can get so sidetracked. People, to me, it's sometimes people are looking for a reason to divide. They're looking for a reason to push you out and shut you out. And it's just, I don't know, in the grace of God and the love of God, the men are leading the church, and any man that I would want my daughter to ever be under, I'd want him to minister to her so she thrives in everything God's called her to do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And men, calm down. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times there's insecurities. Men are not. They're not secure in their masculinity. They've got the ultimate extreme example is some dictator. He's got to control everybody, But the Lord wants to set us free from all that we could lead in love. We could lead in service. We could want everyone to thrive. We want people to become better than ourselves, I think that's the heart of Christ. I think it's a lot of insecurities and things that lead to these big conversations that end up shutting people down and shutting people out. But anyway, we could talk for hours on this.
Yeah. Well, then
all the churches in Hungary are led by men. The elders are men. And their charge is to make sure those women are thriving and set free to use their gifts, and whether they're speaking or leading worship or whatever they're doing, And the women are rocking. They're rocking and rolling.
And that kind of flows into like the second question on there, is that what role do women have in CGN church planting, which I think has sort of been encompassed. But as one you've planted more churches than all of us combined. What's the role of women in church planting?
They're disciples of Christ. They're If you look at, I talked this morning about the list. Jesus had his list of men and women that he poured himself into. Paul the Apostle had his list of men and women that he poured himself into. In the church structure, just like in a home, the husband is a man. And what is the husband's job? To make sure his wife and his kids are thriving in their gifts. The pastor is a man, and what's his role? To make sure everybody, male and female, is thriving in what they're called to do. So, women they're 60%, of the Fort Lauderdale church.
Yeah, I would say specifically in the space of church planting, we encourage the creation of teams to plant. And oftentimes it is super helpful to have women leaders on that team, but they're not the ultimate arbiter of doctrine, nor are they filling the roles of elder or pastor in our context of CGN church planting, especially Calvary chapels.
Sure.
I think there's a huge role, because we've heard more than one story where the church plant, the idea or the vision of that was given to the woman in the relationship first. Kay Smith's own testimony is that was her heart, right? So I think there's a big role that women can play. And my husband and I have planted 2 churches, and I know that I did a lot of the work in the early days of, as the administrator and the children's ministry coordinator and his partner. And I think that even for single women, I think that there is a role that can be played in church planting. A lot of times as women, we think, church planting's only, for the men. That's not true. That is absolutely not true. And we need to be that voice, a respectful voice. But in our congregations, with 60% being women, if you're sitting at the table with all men, you're missing the needs of the congregation. If you don't have a woman's voice in there that can, there's been more than one time in our meetings where I've championed the cause of the women within our congregation and said, this is what the women are saying. This is what the women need.
Yeah, let me just echo that. I was meeting with a pastor, and he said, in every meeting you have, in every room you have, where there's the ability to have a woman's voice, make sure there's a woman at the table. So aside from our pastor's meeting, there's a woman in every one of the meetings we have. Our lead team, our director's meeting, and in our school. And those voices are invaluable because they add a perspective that 12 men aren't going to have. And that's self-evident.
Yeah, so we've talked about, the importance of earlier on about, raising up, investing in every part of our church, the male minority and the female majority. Here's a question that came in actually yesterday, but this is saying, as a CCBC graduate from years ago, I never received training on preaching or weddings or funerals or drafting bylaws or leading a staff meeting. And then the question is, well, do you have any book recommendations? But maybe let's skip the book part. So how can it be, and how could we do a better job in helping upcoming leaders through the Bible college